Actually Speaking, Episode 11, Managing an Aggressive Tone. Want to know how to live skeptically and still have friends? So do I. Let's figure it out. Actually Speaking, a podcast that explores the human side of skepticism, critical thinking, and the skills we need to make it through the day. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Actually Speaking, a podcast that sets the science aside and explores the human side of skepticism. My name is Mike Meraz, and today we're going to take a look at the never-ending nice versus jerk debate within skepticism and see if there isn't something useful we can learn from it. Skeptics will argue internally over just about anything. Most of the time it's done constructively, and in order to dig deeper into an issue or think through a complex problem more thoroughly. But every now and then, skeptics venture into the territory of fighting amongst themselves for the sake of winning and simply being right. We take complex gray issues and distill them down into black and white arguments and plant flags firmly on one side or the other. It's unfortunate, but hey, we're human. It happens. One debate is particularly susceptible to this type of fighting. It goes by a lot of names, but I'm just going to refer to it as the nice versus jerk debate. And it's getting a lot of attention right now in the skeptic community. The argument simply asks, which is the better method of promoting skepticism and combating irrationality? Niceness or jerkishness? Unfortunately, this is a debate that'll never be won. There will always be those who feel that ridicule and aggression are the only effective tools against irrationality. Similarly, there will always be those who feel that patience and education are the best approach to promoting skepticism. A debate of this nature is fine in and of itself, because it forces us to question and challenge our communication tendencies and hopefully look at them objectively. But if the only result of this debate is division, frustration, and anger, then it really isn't helping the cause of skepticism at all. For this to be useful to me, I need to look at it differently. I need to look beyond the labels and insults and see what tools and behaviors lie underneath that I can actually apply to my daily life. I need to know what it is about my behavior that makes me look nice or like a jerk, so that I can have some control over that. So for me, I choose not to take sides in this debate. If we remove the insults, I actually believe both sides are right and needed in order to effectively promote skepticism. But I don't say that for the sake of taking the neutral ground. I say that because I see within both sides of the debate a common set of tools being employed for a common goal. The problems arise from not knowing when to use them. It's like asking which is better, a hammer or a screwdriver. Well, neither, and both. They're both tools which have a very different purpose, but serve a similar goal of either building or repairing. Their effectiveness depends on the situation. You could list all the benefits of being a hammer that a screwdriver lacks, and you'd be right. The same can be done for the other side. But the argument rings hollow when the tool is advocated independent of the situation. Skeptical outreach and communication functions in a similar way. As skeptics, we have a common set of tools in our toolbox, but their use requires thought, experience, and judgment. If we want to be effective, we need to understand the tools at our disposal along with their appropriate use. Now, to the credit of both camps, Team Nice and Team Jerk, you'll often hear each side say that the other does have value in certain situations. But that's usually as far as it goes. That's too bad, because that is where the real value of the debate lies. What is it that the other side is doing that has value? And what are the situations in which it should be used? Those are the questions I want to hear answered. That is my starting point. Remember, all good communication begins with a realistic and appropriate goal. Achieving that goal requires us to know our audience in order to choose the appropriate tools to use in our interactions with others. My goal is to promote critical thinking, and to do so in a way that keeps the flow of communication with family and friends open wherever possible. First of all, let's rethink the labels we use for the extremes in this argument. When we talk about being nice versus being a jerk, we're really talking about passive interactions versus aggressive interactions with non-skeptics. These are far more useful labels, and both can be effective approaches. The labels nice and jerk really only reflect emotion, personality, and are basically our biases in label form. We don't need them. Our goal is neither to retaliate nor accommodate. It's to educate, and effectively. But navigating my interactions with others in terms of how passive or aggressive I'm being is still difficult. So for learning purposes, let's break that down further into 3 components that are easier to understand. In fact, imagine that your promotion of skepticism is like a machine with 3 settings that you can adjust from high to low as needed. The 3 settings are assertiveness, intervention, and discreditation. These settings serve as the mental model I use to help me navigate and adapt my style of communication to different people and different situations. They help me visualize and control my level of aggression. Turn all these settings to high and your overall tone becomes more aggressive. Add insult and ridicule to the mix and you enter into jerk territory. Turn all these settings to low and your tone becomes more passive. Add inaction and avoidance to the mix and you enter into the nice territory. Both extremes are useful, but as you might expect, we'll often find ourselves somewhere in the middle. So what is the variable that guides these settings? What makes me crank them up to high or down to low? Well, that would be the level of harm that's present. And that is going to be a judgment call, which will be different for each and every time. We just need to do our best with that one. Now, this isn't scientific or research-based in any way. It's just a model that I use to help me conceptualize simple factors which affect the tone perceived by others. It's a starting point. It's quick and dirty, nothing more. So let's look at each component more closely. When I want to more closely manage the tone of my skeptical message to others and make adjustments for effectiveness, I focus on 3 components. The first is assertiveness. In this context, I view assertiveness as the intensity with which I present my own skeptical positions relative to the positions of others. On one end, a calm discussion, friendly gathering, or a talk with someone struggling with their own thoughts on an issue might benefit from a lower level of assertiveness on my part. This doesn't mean my views or positions would be hidden. They'd simply be toned down so as not to drown out the spark of critical thought emerging in others. On the other end, a hostile individual, an online argument, or a blatant misrepresentation of facts might benefit from a higher level of assertiveness on my part. My own positions or contributions to a discussion are pretty useless if they get drowned out and go unheard by others. Being more assertive prevents this from happening. When we look at our interactions in terms of assertiveness level, it's easier to see that the context does matter. Arbitrary levels of assertiveness can be detrimental to the promotion of skepticism. You risk not being heard, or worse, extinguishing a spark of skepticism before it takes hold. I keep this setting on low for anyone new to the concept of skepticism, and I crank it up for those who make a conscious effort to drown me out. The second is intervention. My level of intervention refers to the degree by which I will intervene in the decision-making process of others. Assertiveness dealt with my positions. With intervention, I'm focused on how my actions influence the decision-making and learning process of others. On one end of the spectrum, we have a minimal intervention. This is where our influence is more passive. I serve as an active example of critical thinking. I listen and reflect back to others in a way that allows for their own self-discovery and analysis. I model the behavior I want to promote. Identify examples of skepticism currently at work in their lives in order to build upon them. I basically serve as a mentor. On the other end of the intervention spectrum, I will more directly and consciously interfere with a decision-making process when the urgency presents itself. I don't wait for things to be figured out when a greater degree of potential harm is present. I point out errors, I debate and challenge conclusions, cite examples of harm or negative consequences to lines of thought or beliefs. In some cases, I may intervene by talking directly to family and friends who might be in harm's way, or who might be able to assist me in spreading the voice of reason. Intervention should be used with caution. We can't make people think or believe things if they don't choose to do so themselves. the best we can do is intervene to minimize the harm and impact they may have on those around them. I keep this setting low almost all the time unless harm is both significant and immediate. Use of homeopathy to treat a child's asthma. A decision not to vaccinate for whooping cough when an infant is on the way. Or the use of chiropractic care as an alternative to vaccination are 3 recent examples of my needing to increase my level of intervention among my family and friends. The third is discreditation. This final area of discreditation, this is different from intervention in that it's directed at the credibility of an individual as well as the misinformation. This is also the trickiest to navigate because of its potential for misuse. On one end, we promote skepticism by trusting and empowering an individual in their ability to reason and think critically. While mistakes, misinformation, and decision-making might leave plenty of room for improvement, we nonetheless treat the individual as credible, well-intentioned, and capable. I think most people fall into this category. Unfortunately, on the other end of the spectrum is the need to discredit an individual. This isn't an area I'm particularly comfortable with, but I do realize that it's one I must be prepared to confront. Under these circumstances, we can no longer rely on an individual's own ability to reason through an issue and come to a conclusion that presents no harm to themselves or others. Our own ability to intervene has often failed, and a person is bent upon a course of action that defies reason and evidence and presents harm to others. When education, intervention, reason, logic, and appeals to compromise and communication are met with flat-out resistance and hostility, we are left with no other option than to discredit a source of harmful misinformation in order to protect others. Among my family and friends, I view almost all of them as credible and capable individuals, deserving of my support and friendship. I trust them to use their own abilities in applying critical thinking to their lives with minimal assertiveness and intervention on my part. When my mother sees through a nutrition scam, I support that accomplishment. When my niece has questions about her commitment to religion, I trust in her ability to come to her own conclusions. For me, discreditation becomes a necessity when we enter the territory of Sylvia Browne or Jenny McCarthy, when an individual is openly hostile to reason, resistant to discussion, and has the means and influence to do harm. Hopefully we don't have many of these individuals in our daily lives, but some people come close, and I must admit, I have a couple within my circle of friends who have earned the level of aggression and discredit I now show them. So, this is my model for managing my level of aggression and tone as I live a skeptical lifestyle. I pay attention to my level of assertiveness, intervention, and discreditation. It's my starting point for better managing my tone and effectiveness, and I'm happy to adapt this approach as I learn more. Effective communication is hard and complex. You can quantify it quite a bit, but in the end, it's still more of an art to implement. As a skeptic, I need to be able to change as the situation changes. Locking into a nice or jerk camp does nothing to develop my ability to adapt. There will always be jerks, damaging the image of skepticism and turning people away. And there will always be those who misunderstand nice to mean avoidance or inaction. And both should be confronted with a good dose of reality. Fortunately, from my experience, most skeptics don't fall into these categories. And I think understanding the skills and tools which lie beneath our tone will actually help prevent us from dividing into camps. So, with that being said, I choose to set the insults and labels aside, and instead embrace the benefits of both passive and aggressive interactions with non-skeptics. I do this by paying attention to my level of assertiveness, level of intervention, and the degree to which I discredit. My tendencies and comfort level may lean to one side of the spectrum, but my effectiveness depends on my ability to function on both ends, and that takes practice. Now, is my perspective on the debate based on science and research? Well, hopefully influenced, but otherwise, no, and I make no claims that it is. I'll leave that to others with the appropriate expertise. It's simply my attempt to understand the nice versus jerk skeptic within me, in order to more effectively interact with people when I walk out the door, go online, or answer the phone. What's important isn't that we see things in exactly the same way, but that we learn from the diversity of our interactions in order to better be able to promote critical thinking. So, when you see that skeptical hammer and screwdriver out there, don't worry too much about the differences in their design. Just make sure you have both in your toolbox and know when and how to use them. If you have questions, comments, or would like to share your own tips and ideas on living skeptically, send them to actuallyspeaking@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/factually. Thanks for listening.